Hey, what is up? So, next thing I'm going to talk about is Terraform Provisioners. The first thing I'll tell you is if you're looking at using a provisioner, maybe you should look at a different way of doing whatever it is you're trying to do. So, I'm not a huge fan of this concept, and they even say it's more of a pragmatic measure. So, let's take a look at this. So, what is a provisioner? Provisioner is basically a way to execute something locally um, on an instance or wherever that is something you would do after the instance was created. So if you have a server that's being built and afterward you want to run a command, let's say you want to cat a file or echo something into a file. With AWS, which is what we've been using user data to do that, which is pretty common, right? But in some cases, you don't have that ability to do that. Maybe you're not using AWS, or maybe you're doing something different, and you need a way to run these commands. So I'll talk about maybe a better alternative to that. So it says they include the concept as a measure of pragmatism because there's always going to be some weird niche case, right? Some edge case thing that somebody needs it. So if that's you, hey, great. But however, it does make it kind of complex, and Terraform can taint your resources if something goes wrong with that, and that might not even be build related. So there's a couple different things that happen. You can have two different scenarios. Well, should this be just part of your image, in which case maybe you want to use a template for something like Packer? Or is this something where you want to register this target with a configuration management tool like Ansible and then have Ansible run whatever that is on top of your provisioned resources? So those are both great options, and I would actually recommend you use one of those two instead of a provisioner. But we'll go ahead and look at what this is. So you can pass data into a VM, right? Um, you can interact with SSH or WinRM or whatever, log in the server. Most cloud, you can do something with, um, like Amazon does user data, GCP does metadata. You can do, a couple different options there. They do tell you, and again, remember this HashiCorp, so this is just their opinion. Um, if you have to use generic images, there's a number of provisioners for launching specific configuration management products. They don't recommend using them, but instead using a Packer image. Some people don't have that luxury, and they end up using configuration management for a lot of things. Some people don't like to have lots of images and they would rather use configuration management, which is also a choice. But if you're using them, you need to delay the registration step until the final system is booted to your custom image. So in order to do that, you can use a mechanism described above to pass the necessary information onto each instance so it can register itself. So what that means is, like, if I'm using AWS, I can have a user data script that says, hey, go register yourself with Ansible, or hey, you're now a part of inventory for, whatever you want to use, Chef, Puppet, whatever. Um, if you're using like something like dynamic inventory for Ansible, if something is created, then it should pick that up, right, and register itself, and then that becomes part of the inventory. And then whatever stuff you need to run on it should just run if you have that configured correctly. And we'll get into that later on when I go over Ansible stuff. Um, I mean, you can do local exec and run commands. It's really dirty when you're doing a local exec provisioner and say, hey, run this command, right? And it's like, ooh, that just feels nasty. So I don't recommend it. There's a Medium article that talks about this exact thing, to do local script execution, remote script execution, file copies, directory copies, running config management stuff. So for like local X provisioner, you could do like, hey, I want to run this local thing, right? But then I'm going to run this, like you create this resource, but then you say, hey, provisioner local X, echo the instance IP into this text file, which also is a horrible pattern. Don't do that. You can do remote X to do it on a remote resource once it's created. For SSH, having that kind of access and things like that. So here's a look at a security group, for example. You've got an inbound port 22 from everywhere, and inbound port 80 from everywhere. Outbound all IPs, all protocols, and you can set that up. I just don't think this is port 22 is used by SSH to SSH by Terraform. Opening it up like this is a horrible example. Like, why would you do that? That just seems silly. But you do need a connection to do that. So it's easier to do this at um, at the moment of provisioning. So one of the things is if you don't do it as part of your provisioning from Terraform, it is going to be slower, right? So as soon as you have everything built, if you're executing things locally, it's going to take place after the provisioning is complete, which means it's going to take longer to run and your resources aren't going to be able to run as fast as if, say, you use a Packer template where you're just updating that template. So as soon as it's provisioning something, it's already set up the way that you want it, which is what I would recommend. If you have a baseline and that baseline is good enough for all instances, but then you have like groups of instances that need specific configuration, that's where I would look at doing some like dynamic inventory with Ansible and creating groups in your inventory in order to execute unique configuration for each group. And I think that would be a better pattern, especially for tracing. You won't end up with tainted infrastructure, things like that. So, yeah, so I'm not going to go through this because it's not a pattern that I'm a huge fan of, so I'm not actually going to use it. But especially because, like I said, it's a niche thing. It doesn't sound like HashiCorp is a huge fan of doing it all the time, anyways, because it is created as a measure of pragmatism. So, for that reason, I'm not actually going to demo this. You can look it up and check it out if you want to, but that's pretty much it. So, I just wanted to cover it because you do have to know what it is. It is going to come up if you're taking an exam or if you're doing an interview and somebody asks about provisioners and you might be able to explain, well, you have some options, like why are you using a provisioner? What's the use case? Why is this necessary? What did you try? What kind of problems did you run into? Are you open to other opportunities or other options? And then be able to tell them, well, we've got templates, things like Packer. We can do configuration management. There's a couple other things you could do and see what people are into. So yeah, if you got any questions, let me know. And if not, then welcome to knowing things about provisioners.